hold even half of that number if they were flowering. So when considering how many plants to put in the grow tent, calculate that number off of the mature plant sizes. Overcrowding a tent can lead to lower yields through a mechanism called shade avoidance syndrome. When a plant is shorter and it receives less light due to being shaded by the neighboring plants, it will focus its growth energy on growing taller to capture more of the light. And this elongates the plant, it can alter the flowering time, and it will negatively affect the lateral branching. Overcrowding your grow tent also increases the risk of pests and mold problems. With leaves from neighboring plants overlapping, insects have an interconnected highway to move all around your grow space. Having an overly stuffed grow tent also leads to less airflow within the canopy, which creates pockets of moisture and warm air. And these two things can increase the potential for powdery mildew on your crop. However, with good airflow in and around the canopy, along with a regular defoliation schedule, growers can get away with plants packed tighter. In my previous video, I talked about the average yield per plant. If the grower knows the duration of the growth cycle and the yield per plant, they can determine how many plants they need to grow in order to maintain their own supply of cannabis in between harvests. The number of plants they need to grow will dictate the size of the grow tent they will need. So, generically speaking, these are the plant count recommendations for the most commonly used grow tent sizes. As a personal note from experience, a new grower might think that a smaller 2x2 tent would be easier to manage. But, truth be told, it's a challenge to control the environmental conditions in that small of a space. They heat up quicker from the light source, they cool off more when the light goes off, and humidity levels can rise quickly, especially after watering your soil. I personally recommend a 4x4 grow tent to avoid the hassle of needing constant environmental adjustments. And even if a 4x4 tent will hold more plants than you think you'll grow, it's always nice to have the ability to add another plant to your garden without needing to buy more grow equipment or another tent. Probably the biggest factor aside from genetics would be the amount of time a grower is going to keep the plant in the vegetative cycle.
What up?
This is where photoperiod cannabis and autoflower cannabis differ. Autoflower varieties flower on their own schedule and do not need the grower to change the light schedule. Because of this, you can generally fit a few more autoflowers in your tent. If you're growing a number of different strains in the grow tent, consider that the different genetics may have varying space requirements, which is another good reason to check the strain description from the breeder before purchasing your seeds. A good breeder will always have a description for each strain they offer. If you're like me and enjoy having a number of strains on hand, keeping a shorter vegetative cycle will allow growers to put more plants in a single tent. More plants means a shorter vegetative time and a smaller individual yield per plant. The opposite would be fewer plants and a longer vegetative time. But ultimately, that will get you more yield per plant. If you have found your favorite strain and are less focused on growing variety, fewer but larger plants may be the way to go for you. One thing to consider with longer vegetative times, though, is that you will need to use larger containers, and you will also need to keep the nutritional needs of that plant in check for longer, which is something for new growers to consider. Now, some of you might be thinking, why would I veg for less time if I'm going to get less yields? And that's a valid question. But variety is one reason. And as an experienced grower, I know that if we look at total yield on an annual basis, these numbers come out roughly even, as you can see in this chart. Plant training also matters. As a new grower, you may not be experimenting yet